Rain had been threatening all afternoon, that kind of bruise, colored sky that presses low and holds its breath. He'd messaged with a simple invitation, no car sent, no chef waiting, no staff lined along marble to pretend they weren't watching. Just an address and, "Come hungry." That softness felt like a secret only two people could keep. The city was loud with horns and hurry, but the elevator rode up in a hush, like it knew better than to spoil what was about to begin. The door opened to an apartment that did not try to impress. There were windows, yes, glass like a held note, but the place exhaled warmth instead of wealth, lights low, a kitchen that looked used, an apron thrown across a chair. There was a faint music of knives somewhere, not sharp yet, just the idea of preparation. And there he was, sleeves rolled to the forearms, a white shirt half untucked, not as an act of rebellion, but as if ease had finally won an argument with perfection. "Hey," he said, like we'd been doing hello for years. Nothing in him announced a fortune, no watch worth a scandal, no posture that demanded the world bow. Just eyes that lingered one heartbeat longer than politeness and hands that felt like they'd done more than sign things. He reached for tomatoes, not the glistening kind grown inside a commercial dream, but the imperfect ones from a real stall, sun bruises and all. He turned them in his palms, weighing them as if they might tell a truth, and he was patient enough to listen. The first sound of thunder found us standing in the quiet of his kitchen, and something inside relaxed. The air carried that pre-storm metallic promise, a taste at the back of the tongue that says now. He set down the knife and smiled at the window where the first fat drops began to draw commas on the glass. Then he looked back with the sort of curiosity that feels like both invitation and home. "Cook with me?" he asked. Not a command, not a performance, a simple bridge to cross. The cutting board waited. He placed it near mine so that shoulders almost touched but didn't. Tomatoes rolled under my fingers. Basil released its small, holy perfume with the warmth of my skin. He showed how he sliced, slow, steady, almost meditative, talking under breath about his grandmother teaching him in a kitchen that had only one good pan and a radio with a cracked dial. Money wasn't in the memory, only love and the rhythm of a blade keeping time with a heart that hadn't yet learned to outrun itself. Silence made more room than words. The rain took the stage, hard now, drumming the city into a lullaby. He moved around me, reaching for olive oil, for salt, for garlic, each motion careful, not because he feared breaking something, but because care itself is a language. The glass door to the terrace slid open of its own weight when he nudged it, inviting the storm inside. The temperature dropped, and every hair on my arms noticed. He saw it, the small shiver that lived between breath and speech, and he didn't ask if I needed a sweater. He turned up the stove and stood closer, a quiet shelter. Garlic bloomed in the pan and broke my careful composure. Some scents are keys. One inhale and the locked room opens. Childhood kitchens, late nights, tears that meant hope, not loss. He listened without interruption when the memory forced itself into a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a confession. The steam fogged the nearest window until our reflections became simple shadows, two figures blurred into one softness. He reached for my hand without looking at it, guided my fingers to the pinch of salt, the kind you throw from high so it falls like snow. "Trust your hand," he said. "It knows more than recipes." The remark arrived like a hand on the small of the back, gentle but guiding. Trust and hand, and more than recipes. He wasn't just teaching me how to season. He was asking for something neither contract nor capital could compel. The courage to be specific, the courage to be seen measuring by instinct and history, not by the safe, printed lines in a book. The apron on the chair drifted to the floor with a soft surrender. He picked it up, shook off the ghost of creases, and tied it around his waist with a loose knot. Rain tapped harder. He carried a chopping board to the terrace table, letting droplets bead on the wood as if the night itself wanted to taste. "Let's prep out there," he said, stepping into the storm like a believer. He didn't run. He didn't shield his hair with a newspaper trick learned from chauffeurs. He walked into the weather as if the sky were an honest thing, and he missed honesty. The terrace floor cooled my feet through my shoes, the wind lifting the ends of my sleeves. The city looked less like a conquest and more like a sleeping animal from up there, hunched, breathing, vulnerable. He set the knife down, the metal catching a flash of lightning without trying to own it. Rainwater found our wrists, quicksilver lines escaping to our palms. He laughed at nothing and everything, that laugh with a crack in it where a boy still lives. Then he cuts, low, careful, as if each slice were a promise to keep the moment from turning into spectacle. Something shifted, not in him. He had already been standing there unarmed, in me. The storm had peeled back a layer I didn't know I was wearing, the one stitched with wit and armor, the one that makes hunger passable and fear fashionable. The taste of rain on lips, the smell of basil bruised under thumbs, the steady cadence of his knife, it all conspired to make the truth undeniable. The body was starving for tenderness that did not bargain. The pan hissed our return to the kitchen, the oil accepting tomato and garlic with a sound that felt indecent in the most sacred way. Steam rose in veils, fragrant, humid, close as a whisper. He stood behind, an unhurried nearness, one palm lightly on the counter beside mine, fingers extended as if to say, "Take what you need." The other lifted a wooden spoon to my mouth. He didn't watch my lips when I tasted. He watched my eyes to see if the balance was right. I didn't realize breath had been held until the seasoning touched tongue, and the whole chest remembered it could open. "More salt?" he asked. "No," I said, and somewhere thunder agreed. His smile was almost a gratitude. He reached up to the cabinet and brought down 2 bowls, mismatched, the kind that have histories instead of sets. He twirled pasta with the patience of someone who knows it's a sin to rush what wants to cling. He tore basil with his hands, not out of ignorance but reverence, scattering it like green confetti on vows the world would never hear. Plates were carried to the terrace again, because to eat while the storm still had a story to tell felt essential. We sat under the spill of rain without umbrellas, shoulders damp, bowls warm in our hands. The city threw lightning to entertain us. The river offered applause. Sauces are better outside. Maybe the tongue wakes differently when the sky insists on attention. He ate like a man who has known hunger, not appetite. Quiet, grateful, eyes occasionally closing as if to memorize the taste. Conversation arrived in small slices between mouthfuls, not about markets or acquisitions, but about the color of mornings in places where he used to wake up alone and decide that was enough. He didn't ask for biography. He asked for moments, a painting that had taken too long, a bus stop where someone cried and everyone pretended not to see, the first time cinnamon made a room feel safe. The questions were doors with no locks. Answers walked through them and sat down at the table, dripped on the floor, took off their shoes. Lightning laid a white line across his cheekbone, and he turned toward it, unafraid. Rain gathered at his jaw and fell from his chin in slow, disciplined drops. He looked at me as if the weather had chosen to bless us and he intended to be worthy. With the back of his fingers, he pushed a strand of wet hair behind my ear. No claim, just the intimacy of a gesture that wants nothing except to be felt and remembered. No one watching, no one to reward him for gentleness or write about it in papers that pretend there is such a thing as a billionaire who is also human. He did not perform humanity, he allowed it. The difference is everything. The pasta cooled, we did not care. He told a story about burning onions for an entire year because the heat was always too high. Trying to rush sweetness never works, he said, and he blushed at how earnestly he'd said it. The spoon in my bowl leaned against porcelain with a soft chime, like the tiniest bell calling the heart back to the room. Between a forkful and a breath, quiet lowered itself around us and settled like a scarf. Vulnerability tastes like rain and basil, and a name said softly without an audience. It tastes like someone standing so near that the heartbeat becomes a shared metronome, like knowing a person who can buy anything has chosen to make something with bare hands instead. The sense of being undressed without being touched overtook everything: the absurd wealth, the view, the myths built by magazines. A pulse climbed into the throat and knocked twice, as if to ask for permission to live here, where attention is the only currency. We did not talk about what would happen tomorrow. The storm kept us honest, and the kitchen kept us warm. When the plates were finally abandoned, his hand found the small patience of my wrist, thumb tracing that private river of blood the body hides for emergencies and lovers. It was not a claim. It was shelter offered and received. The room hummed, the sky sighed, the city forgot us, and we let it. The taste of vulnerability is not sweet or bitter. It is salt, the body's proof that feeling has occurred, that admission has been made, that surrender is both terrifying and right. It is thunder in the distance, and a wooden spoon at the lips, and a laugh with a crack in it, and a knife moving slow, because what's precious is not to be rushed. It is a man who could summon 100 hands deciding, instead, to use his own. It is the way rain insists the world be honest for one evening, and how two people, almost touching, finally are. And when the storm passed, the air held the memory the way skin holds warmth, quietly, stubbornly, like a vow no one heard but both of us made. Rain didn't start so much as arrive, one clean sheet, then another, until the world blurred and the terrace lights smeared into halos. The bowls from dinner still breathed their last curls of steam, and the city below let out that collective shiver tall places feel when storm and river conspire. The first drop caught the back of the neck like a secret. The second made breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with weather. He stood at the threshold, a shape cut out of warm light, the kitchen behind him exhaling garlic and basil and something like relief. "You'll get soaked," he said, but his voice had no argument in it. The rain found his hair anyway, darkening it, making it honest. When he stepped out, the robe of the sky settled over both of us, wet and heavy and kind of holy, and the little table between us felt like the only island in a sea that wanted us to tell the truth. Clothes forgot their purpose quickly out there. Linen loosened, cotton confessed, water traced every seam the body had tried to keep tidy. Heat rose from skin to meet the cold, and somewhere in that meeting a different kind of weather began, one made of closeness and breath, and the ungoverned intelligence of touch that asks permission with every inch it travels. Thunder lived a few neighborhoods away. The sound carried, protective and far. Lightning blinked like a shutter, capturing us over and over, the night composing its own private album. He laughed at the ridiculousness of dining in a storm, and then covered the bowls with his palms as if warmth could be saved by will alone. I watched water collect at the angle of his wrist and run down into that delicate valley where pulse declares itself. "Come closer," he said, not because the rain demanded it, but because truth does. So I did, and the small distance between shoulders disappeared, the kind of disappearance the heart recognizes as arrival. There is a moment when two temperatures meet and choose each other. The rain's cold was an invitation. The body's heat was the answer. Steam rose from skin, a quiet miracle in the open air. He lifted a hand, not to claim anything, not to explain, simply to smooth rain, slick hair away from eyes that were still learning how to be looked at like this. The pad of his thumb grazed temple and stopped, hover, light, as if the storm itself had said, "Wait." Patience occupies touch differently than hunger. It settles instead of devours. It listens. A city of windows glittered, indifferent. Under our small sky, the table became a chapel. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around shaking arms with a ceremony that felt older than the weather, older than the version of him that made headlines for reasons that had nothing to do with tenderness. Wool surrendered its smell of quiet halls and careful meetings and learned the scent of rain, skin, garlic, and the soft electricity of now. Cold, he asked, not the kind that matters. I said, and the air agreed, thick with breath that tried not to show how it trembled when our knees met beneath the table, accidental once, then not accidental at all. Speech narrowed into the kind of it, so Kay murmurs, that are more map than sentence. He didn't lean in like a conqueror. He circled like a reader who knows the margins hold secrets the text can't carry. The backs of his fingers learned cheekbones slowly. The inside of his wrist hovered near the mouth and found it warmer than the rest of the night. He didn't rush, didn't negotiate, didn't turn the storm into permission. He let the weather make everything louder, the drum of rain on the metal railing, the shy tap of a spoon in a bowl we had already abandoned, the two-person orchestra of breath adjusting so that inhale and exhale could meet and recognize each other. When mouths finally found the courage to speak in a language older than names, the taste was rainwater and basil and a small, stunned yes. The kiss didn't announce itself. It unfolded the way dawn does, curtains trembling before the light commits. The world, which had insisted all evening on being seen, let itself be ignored. Thunder rolled and then, how foolish thunder can be, held its applause when our pulses synchronized, astonished at being given the same job. Hands learned in increments, one at the nape, curious but careful, one at the small of the back, not pressing, simply reminding, I'm here, I'm here. The other pair mapped shoulders, memorized the shape, whether rights into muscle, found the stubborn knot near the blade, and gentled it with a patience that belonged to people who have burned onions and learned their lesson. The small sounds that escaped had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with recognition. The way it feels when longing finally meets a place it can live. Water made everything honest. Fabric clung without shame. The edge where skin met shirt became a line of conversation, a sentence punctuated by shivers that asked and felt the answer and asked again just to be sure. He listened with his whole body. That's how some people hold you, ears in their hands, eyes in their chest, promise in their breath. His yes was in how lightly he touched, how quickly he eased, how often he looked for the face to confirm what the mouth couldn't manage to say without breaking. A gust pressed us closer, the sky's mischievous hand at our backs. He looked like rain had baptized him into a life he'd been trying to deserve. A laugh almost made it to his lips, and then changed its mind, turning into a softer thing that lived in the throat and trembled there when our foreheads came to rest together. Visibility narrowed to eyelashes wet with weather and the single syllable of a name. The city fell away until it was only pulse and warmth and the clean gravity that arrives when pretending vacates the premises. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, we warmed each other in old human ways, friction as a lullaby, closeness as a language no algorithm can predict. His fingers traced the rain's path along a jawline. Mine answered on the inside of his forearm, where a vein rose to meet attention like a flower leaning into light it trusts. The slow, repeated motion was a vow spoken without the arrogance of certainty. Stay, stay, stay. Time started to behave strangely. Minutes elongated until they looked like hours. Then a single heartbeat cut through them like lightning through cloud. The storm decided to play gentle for a while, trading thrum for hush. The smell of wet concrete rose from the street like a memory of summers that never quite arrived. We stood, and the jacket slid to the chair, an offering left at a small altar. When hands found hips, they didn't steer, they steadied. When lips returned, they asked the same question again and again, not because the answer was in doubt, but because answers feel truer when requested softly. There are places the body keeps for truths like this. The hollow below the throat, the the curve where neck meets shoulder, the insistent drum just under the ribs. He discovered them with the reverence of someone entering a room whose door had been opened, not kicked in. I discovered how much quieter the world becomes when another heartbeat volunteers to carry a little of the noise. Intimacy is not a victory, it is a ceasefire, a flash through our shadows against the wall, elongated, merged. For a second we looked like a single figure, with 4 hands learning how to hold one life. He said something about the ridiculousness of money in a rainstorm, and I said something about the holiness of wet sleeves, and together we invented a theology of weather and warmth that required nothing but presence. The rest of his life stayed behind the glass, numbers and names and obligations stacked like neat plates. Out here, only breath and body and storm had jurisdiction. When lightning paused its lecture, the night took on that saturated quiet that follows amounts of water cities weren't built to swallow. We leaned into it. He slid a palm along the side of my face and down to the jaw with the kind of care you usually save for heirlooms. And maybe that's what we had become, 2 people offering each other something old and fragile that had somehow survived everything. Faith in touch that tells the truth. There was heat, yes, but it wasn't the kind that devours. It was the kind that keeps. He didn't pull, he invited. The body said yes in small, repeating gestures. A tilt, a lean, a breath surrendered. The rain stitched us to the moment with 1,000 cool threads. When mouths parted, it wasn't absence, it was space for a different tenderness, the one where noses nudge and cheeks rest, and the softest parts of 2 people figure out how not to be alone anymore. We returned to the kitchen only because the sky told us to. Drips jeweled the floor. The room looked like a sanctuary after a midnight service, quiet, rearranged by devotion. He handed a towel across the island and took one for himself, blotting at hair, at collar, at that obedient soaked shirt. The ridiculousness of drying off together made us both grin, our faces aching with a joy that didn't perform for anyone. He came close again without apology, and in the humble light over the sink, we let foreheads touch one more time, the kind of contact that feels like a signature at the end of a prayer. That was when thunder gave its last grumble somewhere east, and the clock remembered to speak. The city turned back on. The air tasted new. He traced a half circle behind my ear with a tenderness that said more than any promise, that the storm had washed away everything that didn't matter and left behind what did. And in that cleaned, quiet hour, 2 heartbeats decided they were done echoing. They would simply move together. The kitchen had gone quiet after the storm, like a stage after the orchestra tucks its sound into velvet cases. The rain had wrung everything out of the night, and what remained was the pulse that insists on being counted. He moved through the room with that unhurried steadiness, clearing bowls, running water, rinsing basil from his hands. There was nothing left to hide behind, no thunder to speak for us, no lightning to explain the way hearts trip when a gaze lands where walls used to be. It should have been easy then, with the weather softened and the food settling into gratitude. But ease is its own kind of danger. It asks for honesty the way the sea asks for swimmers, gently, relentlessly. He handed a towel across the island and met the look without decoration. People talk about being seen as if it were a miracle. They forget it can also be an undoing. He didn't pry. He didn't dress questions like gifts. He just stood there, open, and in that openness, memory started to climb the throat. There are rooms inside the body where light rarely enters. Whole cities built of small silences. The night a door slammed without explanation. The year when mornings felt like obstacles. The habit of smiling so a room can keep its peace. He seemed to know that map without ever having walked it. The way he leaned, forearms on the counter, said, "I can wait." The way his mouth almost smiled and then chose not to, said, "I won't turn this into a story about me. Truth is never loud at first. It starts as a tremor in the chest, not enough to shake hands, but just enough to make language feel like glass." He noticed. "We don't have to talk," he said, voice low, like setting a fragile thing down where it won't be jostled. And that was the key in the lock. The permission not to explain loosened the bolt on everything that needed to be named. Words came like rain after drought, awkward, stopping and starting, grateful for gravity. Not a history, but its shadows, the way a certain tone of voice can turn air into a hallway, the years arranged around other people's comfort like furniture you're not allowed to move, the private religion of always being fine. He didn't correct, didn't fix, didn't translate feeling into advice. He listened in the way that makes listening an action, a shelter, a warm hand held out to a runner who has finally stopped. It's terrifying, that moment when someone looks past the body and sees the ache behind the eyes. It feels like stepping onto a glass bridge and hearing it sing underfoot. Every instinct wants to turn back, to make a joke, to tidy the spill with napkins of charm. He wouldn't let that happen, not by force, but by faith. His silence stitched the air into something that could hold weight. The kitchen light hummed softly, a single note steady as a spine. He came around the island only after breath regained its shape, and even then, he didn't reach first. He waited for permission written in posture and pupils, then a hand, palm up, not a claim but an offering. The contact was barely contact, skin to skin like a prayer touched to a threshold. No urgency, no choreography, just presence. The body held 1,000 alarms. One by one they quieted, wail, song quiet, cathedral quiet, snow, on city quiet. Even the clock practiced reverence. Being known burns deeper than any kiss. It burns clean. It finds the rust and leaves copper. He asked no questions about names or timelines, and somehow it covered more ground than any interrogation could. When he finally spoke, it was only to describe the way his grandmother taught him to stir risotto, slow circles from the edges, coaxing the center into softness. It wasn't about food. It was a kindness disguised as a memory, an art of patience. A way to say, we will not rush your middle. There's a tenderness in not looking away. He practiced it like a craft. When eyes filled, he did not scramble for tissues or apologies. He let it be water doing what water does, carving, cleaning, blessing. The fear backed up, considered its options, and then, with a reluctant bow, made room for relief. It felt almost indecent, how good it was to be unguarded without consequence. The body, unused to safety, kept checking for trapdoors and found none. He moved again, just to the sink, rinsed his hands as if washing off the last of the storm, and then returned. The towel over his shoulder looked like the slightest flag of truce. When he reached to tuck damp hair behind an ear, it wasn't the gesture that undid everything. It was the intention behind it, not a performance, not a seduction, not a step in a dance, merely a way to see more clearly, to allow the face to be fully itself under the soft light. What happens between breaths holds more consequence than what happens between sheets. Between those breaths, a lifetime of armor set itself down and took a seat. Between those breaths, the impulse to minimize dissolved, leaving only the exact size of what was felt. He seemed to respect scale. If pain was small, he folded it into his palm. If it was wide as a field, he stood with it like a tree. No flinching, no cleverness, no bargaining with the parts that hurt. The balcony door, still ajar, let in the cool scent of the world rinsed and reset. He noticed the shiver that ran through and adjusted nothing but proximity, closer but not trapping. The shoulder found a patient wall in his chest. He breathed carefully, adjusting tempo to match, loaning steadiness without theft. People talk about chemistry as if it were electricity. Sometimes it's carpentry, joinery so exact that two pieces become one structure capable of bearing more weight than either could alone. The city gathered itself beyond the windows. Taxi lights wrote broken sentences down the avenue. Somewhere a siren mourned like a train. The apartment answered with small domestic noises. the soft click of cooling metal, the intermittent drip of water off the terrace railing. In that ordinary music, he began to speak, not about work or worry, but about the time he found a bird stunned beneath a bus stop bench during a summer storm, the patience it took to hold it in 2 hands, the way it trembled, the miracle of witnessing it decide to live. He told it like a person who knows the limits of saving and the difference between saving and staying. Fear, once named and heard, changed shape. It lost its teeth. It asked for a glass of water and a chair. He poured and pulled one out. The smallness of the act held more comfort than paragraphs could. He didn't make forever-sized promises. He didn't swear to be the exception to every rule Paine had written. He promised only this: I am here now, and the now became enormous and generous, enough to stretch across a room and make a home out of air. When silence returned, it was companionable. Not the kind that sits with folded arms, daring someone to fill it, but the kind that opens its hands and says, "See, we're still here." He reached for my fingers and pressed them to the center of his chest, right where the rhythm tells the truth. The beat under skin answered a private question, not that he cared, but how, with steadiness, with warmth, with the courage to face instead of fix. There are many ways to be known. Some of them happen under bright lights to loud applause. This kind happens in kitchens at the edge of midnight, after rain, when 2 people accept the poverty of language and offer breath instead. One heartbeat, then the next, not fusion, harmony, the kind of alignment that doesn't erase difference but lets it sing. Outside, the street sighed itself towards sleep. Inside, the last of the fear finished its final lap and sat down beside us, tired and small. He exhaled, and I did too, and the air between us learned a new word: safe. And not boring, not predictable, safe, like standing at the lip of the sea and trusting the tide to keep time. The ache behind the eyes didn't vanish. It softened, as aches do when met with hands that know how to hold a story without trying to edit it. He lifted his head then, forehead against forehead, noses touching lightly, and in that tiny cathedral of shared breath, something that had been clenched for years unclenched, no fireworks, just a door opening on oiled hinges. A body remembered it was not a fortress. A heart remembered it was not alone. And in that quiet, where words had done their work and were allowed to rest, a truth arrived without ceremony. Being seen didn't break anything. It mended what had been breaking for years. Morning carried the kind of quiet that comes after truth. The apartment had rearranged itself overnight. Even the chairs seemed to lean toward each other, conspirators of what the storm had witnessed. On the counter, 2 bowls kissed by sauce waited like small moons cooling from their own tides. The jacket he'd laid across my shoulders still clung to the back of a chair, salted with the ghost of rain and the breath of his cologne. Every room kept a syllable of him. The air, the spoon, the glass door smudged by the store. Each object wore a soft echo, a faint aftertaste of his voice when it softened to say my name. The city outside shook water from its fur and returned to commerce. Sirens remembered their jobs. The river kept its appointment with the bridges. Phones across town woke and started their daily spin. In here, time took its shoes off and moved barefoot. The towel he'd tossed by the sink had the shape of a careless halo. When fingers gathered it up, a warmth returned to the skin that had nothing to do with cotton. The wrist where his thumb had traced a patient circle still knew the exact size of his care. It's strange how an evening folds itself into the body the way flavor does, the way garlic lingers in fingertips no matter how much lemon and salt try to persuade it to leave. The storm had rinsed the world of its glitter and left behind texture. The billionaire parts of him, the headlines and the doors that open by rumor alone, slid back into the city's bloodstream. He stepped into a car, and the building swallowed the little wind that followed. But what mattered refused to be escorted away, the way he paused before touching, as if asking the room for consent. The laugh cracked at the edge by old griefs he didn't perform, the patience that made even boiling water feel like a slow prayer. Walking home was like stepping through a developing photograph. The night revealed itself in layers the farther it receded. Streetlights lifted their heads from puddles. Storefronts set their reflections back on the shelves. Somewhere a bakery started the day early, and the smell of yeast braided itself into what already lived behind the teeth. Basil, steam, and that impossible taste of rain trapped for a second on a lower lips. Wheat only because it belonged to a moment that doesn't repeat. Sleep found the bones but not the breath. Every time eyelids flirted with the dark, memory raised its hand and asked one more question, not to interrogate but to learn by repetition, the way thunder had practiced discretion, the way his hand had stayed palm up longer than comfort would usually allow, the way two heartbeats, surprised to be given the same measure, made a quiet pact to keep time. If love is music, last night was the note that keeps ringing after the piano lid falls. Morning demanded ordinary things: coffee, socks whose twins are always briefly missing, the careful choreography of keys, phone, wallet. But there was a tenderness in the ritual now, a softness like fresh dough rising somewhere just out of sight. The kettle's first whistle sounded like a memory clearing its throat. Steam climbed and drew its finger along the kitchen window, as if signing a name no one else would read. The spoon clinked against the mug with the exact pitch of his laugh when it discovered wonder. Even the mirror proved kind, as if light had remembered the square root of mercy. No text message arrived declaring forever. None was needed. A single line came mid-morning, practical and bright. Hoped you ate the leftover pasta. A second later, next time bring the playlist that made your shoulders relax. The words wore their shoes properly, but their ankles showed a little skin. The body reacted with the same unreasonable gratitude a plant shows when turned toward a window. Breath left on a smile and came back carrying the calm of someone who has finally found a coastline inside. Work turned the day like a wheel, paint under nails, ink smudges where plans refused to behave. The city kept testing patience with its favorite exam, the unpredictable heart of strangers. Yet the aftertaste followed faithfully, in the warmth left on the palm by a cup, in the moment when sunlight surprised the floor, in a false start of thunder that turned out to be a truck passing too eagerly. The world seemed to be practicing tenderness too, hand to chilled metal, cheek to sleeve, the right word arriving on time for once. Later, on a train that hummed like it had learned empathy, eyes closed. The body borrowed last night's cadence and let the rails carry it. The sway matched the memory of his breath. The sound of doors opening at every stop became a chorus of small permission. Across the aisle, a child slept mouth, open against a parent's shoulder, as if trust were the oldest muscle we know how to use. That sight rewound the night to the moment his forehead rested against mine, and the whole complicated biography filed itself under a single name, safe. What lingered wasn't spectacle. It was domestic, almost shy. The way a hand learned the geography of a shoulder without once confusing it for a claim. The way the back of a neck discovered it could relax under a tension that asked nothing in return. The way a voice, careful with its own old wounds, spoke like a candle offers light, not forcing, just available. The city loves a performance. The heart remembers what it can repeat without an audience. Evening returned with an olive-colored sky, and somewhere east, an argument between clouds that wouldn't make it here. Cooking became an act of translation. Tomatoes again, because repetition is a kind of devotion. Garlic, because the body had already decided it was part of this story's grammar. Basil torn by hand, because tenderness tastes better when it isn't cut. Salt thrown from high like blessing. The pan responded with a hiss that felt like recognition, and the first taste from the spoon carried the precise balance last night had taught. Trust your hand. A song found the room, not loud, but true. Shoulders remembered how to drop from around the ears. The fork spiraled pasta with the same patience he'd used, and the bowl warmed tired fingers back into the world. A small ceremony took shape, set a second place at the table anyway. Not superstition, practice, a rehearsal for belonging. When the chair across remained empty, the absence didn't bruise. It glowed a gentle gold, proof that wanting and waiting can sit together without tearing the cloth. Late, the phone lit up with a photo. His stove, a chaos of honest pans. A smear of tomato on a wrist like the signature of a child. Caption, practicing. It was ridiculous how much tenderness could live in 8 letters and a mess. Responses wrote themselves with a grin that reached the eyes. Looks like the storm left you a recipe. The bubble appeared, disappeared, returned, or a religion, and there it was again. The sense that some nights invent faith, and the rest of life is the keeping of it. Days learned to hold the outline of him the way a pocket holds heat. A week went by. Work demanded proof of devotion, and it was given, because love and labor drink from the same well when they are honest. Each evening, small things made space for the larger thing. A chair angled slightly toward a door, the good towel hung near the sink, an extra lemon in the bowl because brightness should be within reach. Friends noticed a softness that didn't ask for permission to exist. One said, "Something's changed," and the mouth betrayed nothing but gratitude, which is also truth and sometimes enough. When news of him seeped through the usual channels, an acquisition, a charity, a photograph of a handshake, the heart felt 2 stories layered but not fighting. There is the world where he wears a name with many zeros. There is this one where rain baptized him into the kind of ordinary that is the most extraordinary thing. Tenderness, patience, a spoon offered at the right time, no contradiction. 2 languages speaking of the same person with different alphabets, and the translation is accurate when read with the chest. Memory sharpened in places and blurred in others, like a film that knows what to emphasize. The exact shape of a raindrop on his jawbone remained. The exact words spoken after didn't matter, and so they softened into texture. What endured was the feel of being looked at as if the ache behind the eyes were not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be held. What persisted was how the body learned to breathe where, for years, it had only remembered how to brace. Sometimes on sidewalks, a stranger's cologne arrives early on the wind and impersonates him for 2 seconds. Sometimes the city glitters to distract, and the mouth almost falls for it, until the hands remember the weight of a wooden spoon and correct the heart's posture. Glitter is an exit sign. Linger is a home. The aftertaste of forever isn't sugar. It's salt, clean, elemental, honest. It lives on the lips of prayers and on the rim of glasses raised in kitchens where promises are made with actions. Weeks became a small season. The plants on the sill learned the names assigned in a moment of ridiculous joy. A playlist grew like ivy, climbing over days that needed softening. On a night with a sky the color of an old bruise, the doorbell announced a package, one pan heavy and promising, a note tucked into its curve, for when storms visit again. The laugh that escaped brought tears with it, because the body often doesn't know the difference between too much happiness and the relief of being understood. The pan found its place on the stove like a dog knows its bed. The world moved as it always does, messy, loud, occasionally kind. Love did not glitter. It showed up in dishes left to soak, in texts that remembered the right song, in the patient arc of a hand learning another person's weather patterns. It lingered in the coat that held the storm, in the towel that knew the curve of a shoulder, in the way 2 bowls on a counter look like parentheses holding an evening the calendar will never capture. Some nights aren't meant to end. They change shape and keep speaking, and this one keeps saying the same simple, saving thing. Stay. If this story touched a place words rarely reach, stay. Hit like so I know your heart was here. Subscribe if you believe love isn't about perfection. It's about presence, rain, and raw honesty. Share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles, and keep coming back, because every story here remembers you. Until next time, hold on to the aftertaste of forever.